thought saw Mayor Nelson from Atwater, but he may have slipped off. Here he comes back on. So folks are just logging in. Going to give people just a minute or so. Give folks just a minute or two. Mayor Nelson, I was saying that I saw you log in and then you disappeared. So I just wanted to thank you for making time joining us
Oh,
from Atwater.
yeah, no problem. I had to do something else and it wouldn't let me multitask without getting out of the meeting. So,
Yeah, no, cool. Thank you so much.
yeah.
I saw you log in early and I told the group here and we all got very nervous. We're like, oh yeah, we got a mayor on. So best behavior,
Well,
everybody.
city manager's on vacation today, so I'm filling in.
Very
That's
cool.
all.
See a couple people logging in. Just giving people a minute to join. We were just joined by Mark Mims, who's the Community and Economic Development Director for Merced County. Thanks for joining in.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Let me. People are going to continue to trickle in, but let me get us started. My name is Eric Serrato, and I am the Executive Director of North Valley Thrive. If I look familiar to some of you in Merced County, it's because I also happen to be the Workforce Board Director down here in Merced. But regionally, I and Dr. Thomas Pogue, who you'll hear from, and Yolanda Meraz, lead this regional project called North Valley Thrive. And it is an inclusive economic development project that was started by the state a few years ago under a program called California Jobs First. Essentially, our focus is to better understand the economy of our three counties, which are Merced, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin counties, identify what we are really good at, and develop our economies in a way that reaches even those people that are most often left out of economic decision making. And the biggest of a strategic plan that we submitted. And now we're activating that strategic plan around three key economic sectors, which are advanced manufacturing, clean energy, and the bioeconomy. But in addition to that work, we've been doing lots of other really cool things that we think have a real value to many of you that are doing this work every day. And so what we're doing over the next several weeks is we're having these little lunch and learns, and we're focusing on a different kind of product that we've kind of put out there or in process. And today's is about an industrial lands analysis that's been taken on by Dr. Pogue and his team of strategists, where they really looked at all the industrial counties and did a lot of specific work in Merced County, sort of as the lead. And so it's our opportunity to share where we're at with that and ask questions. This is something that we want to continue to develop. And so we need to hear from all of you, particularly you practitioners, about how you see this fitting into your work. I do want to make a shout out for what comes next. That is March 12th. We'll have one of these that's focused on labor's perspective on all of this work in these three strategic areas, these three industry sectors. And then on the 19th, we're going to have one which is going to be a really cool kind of historical look at the history of our economic development in our three counties. And that is led by this brilliant guy, Philip Merlot, who worked with a lot of researchers and partners. Carla is one of those, and I see that she's on the call. And so we're going to hear a lot about the contributions, really focusing on waves of immigrants that really built up our economy. And then we're going to have one on sort of forecasting growth in the three counties. And Dr. Pogue will walk us through kind of population stats and where we think we're going to go. That'll be, I believe, on the 25th. I do, before I hand this over to Dr. Pogue, want to recognize that we do have some members of our steering committee that are on. And so I see Amanda Hughes is on, Bruce Robertson, Eleazar Abraham. We've got Jean Acevedo. We have Steve Stevenson, Johnny Garcia, Jesse Ornalis, and Carla, as I mentioned. And so I just want to thank our steering committee members. These are folks in all three of our counties that are really leading the work for us, and they do amazing work in their careers and then contribute to the vitality of our region that way. All right, so thank you so much for joining. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Pogue.
Thanks, Eric. Just a quick note on the forecasting event. It will be April 2nd, and as much as I'm thrilled to be talking, I think what might be more interesting is we have the chief economist from the Department of Finance and the chief state demographer from the Department of Finance that'll also be talking on that webinar. So it should be interesting because not only will it be talking about the North San Joaquin Valley, but also the framing of the state in terms of its growth and dynamics and the opportunities and challenges associated with some of these changes. With that being said, again, appreciate your acknowledgement, Eric, but I am just fortunate enough to be working with these teams. Egon and Alison and their teams and the coordination of work that they've overseen for us has been great. I've been thrilled to hear about it, but I haven't been actively doing it, just listening and offering opinions. So really excited to hear from them today about these two important projects that are interrelated and relate to the broad area of region-wide cross-cutting economic strategies and resources that we need to look at for the challenges and opportunities that the North San Joaquin Valley has to face. So I think, and Egon, you can take this as you will, but I'm going to hand it over to you. I think it'll be best, given the number of people, if we let you go through your presentation and then take some questions, just a few, and then we'll go over to Alison and let her take some questions, and then we'll throw it open with any time we have left for further discussion at the end. So with that being said, Egon, please take us through this industrial land supply and demand analysis.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pogue and Eric and team. So Egon Terplan, I've served in a strategy capacity advising University of Pacific and North Valley Thrive for some time and wanted to share with you a little bit about this project. And I actually think I want to kind of start with the problem statement question that drove this initial work and begin by kind of sharing a little bit the conclusions. We'll share with you some of the data and the kind of direction from it. But I think most important, what I would like to get out of this is, in fact, a conversation of what this means. And Alison, with your work that we go, and then kind of maybe we can come back to at the end, because there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice this and show you a whole variety of charts and graphs. But I think the ultimate question is really a strategic one. And because it's sort of where are we at, and then what do we do about it? So I do have some slides to show, but I believe I'm allowed to share from where we are sitting here. But that's really my focus and my purpose here is for us to kind of have this strategic conversation. So I am looking here. Tell me if you see my screen now. Let me get it to the first one. Tell me if if you have it here.
We can see it.
Excellent. Okay. So as Dr. Pogue said and Eric said, that we began this process that of course, North Valley Thrive has been looking at a series of strategic sectors and understanding the growth of various industries. Behind all this question is a question of land. Not only where do these industries grow, but in particular, as you hear, some of the industries that have been targeted, clean energy, the circular bioeconomy, advanced manufacturing, tend to go on what we might call industrial land. I think it's no surprise to all of you, of course, a lot of the industrial land in the region has also had a significant amount of warehousing and distribution activity, at least over the last decade, as well as prior to that. So we really began this process with a question. I should note that this is work that we commissioned to work with a company called Echo Northwest. And Beam Circular was also involved in it because there was another side of this work that looked more specifically at opportunities for the circular bioeconomy, and that's not what we're sharing today. We're sharing a little bit more of the broad kind of industrial demand. But this was the question we began with. Is there enough industrial land to accommodate future economic growth? And when I say sort of sustainable economic growth, the question of land is there's certainly sufficient land if we intended to use all the land that exists, right? Where do we want to put the growth is fundamentally the question. The North San Joaquin Valley is an area with a significant amount of prime farmland. And so it's, of course, a question of do we want to locate a lot of the industrial activities on the prime farmland or not? And so as we went through this process, I want to get you to the punchline, then get you to some of the recommendations, and then we'll go a little bit into the kind of sausage making and can share some other pieces. The short answer is yes. There's a sufficient amount of industrially zoned land for the forecast demand that we have for industrial activities. But the core caveat is where matters a lot. In other words, is that land located in adjacent to existing transportation corridors? Is it land that's located adjacent to existing cities? Is it land that has a significant amount of existing infrastructure to support investment in it? And that's where the answer is a little bit murkier. And a lot of the sites don't quite have that level of infrastructure in place to be successful. So a couple of very high kind of level findings from this work. 3/4 of all the industrial supply out there is for warehousing and distribution. So the industrial activity, a lot of it is in moving and storing goods, not in manufacturing. 10% of the region's employment is in manufacturing, but 75% of the overall land supply and industrial is focused on warehousing and distribution. Looking ahead, there's a sense of some of the projections are showing a decline in growth. And so that shapes a huge amount of do we have enough land to support the industries going forward? And in part because of the slowing growth and the existing capacity, that's why we get to the answer of yes, between the supply and demand. And so that's why there's a significant, sufficient amount of square footage for this. But the other question is one of site readiness. And that's sort of what we're getting at. And some of this is actually really about information on the level of site readiness, which really varies. You also have, from a utility infrastructure standpoint, you have the PG&E territory, and then you have your irrigation districts. And some of that relates to both the speed at which you can get interconnections as well as what the cost might look like. And some of those become competitiveness factors going forward. And of course, places where there's a lot of existing facilities, existing transportation infrastructure, those are where you see and you're going to continue to see higher rates of the kind of warehousing and distribution. So that's super high level. We'll go into some of the details, but what does this mean? I actually like starting with some of these actions and recommendations. And so this is sort of a summary, and I should say Dr. Pogue and Eric and others haven't seen all these things. I want to put this out there in part as a conversation. Because when you do an analysis and it doesn't say sort of red light, flashing light that there isn't enough land for something, it begs the question of kind of where are you at? So here's a number, and I want to come back to this at the end. So I'm sort of mention this, and then we'll go through it. First, we should be maintaining an ongoing inventory of industrial sites and sort of knowledge of what they are, where are they in the kind of zoning process, other rezoning efforts at a regional scale. Knowing this at a regional scale is important. And that's part of what the North Valley Thrive process is about, is really kind of thinking at the 3-county level. Second, related to that is this sort of deeper analysis of site readiness. And there's examples that we learned about from Oregon and Washington of kind of tiers of readiness across the various land types. And that is a way to make sure that when a company comes and is looking for space, we know where to put them. And again, thinking about it on a kind of multi-county level. Another idea, and we understand the city of Stockton does this, is distinguishing in your zoning between warehousing and distribution and other industrial activities. And the reason that's important is if there's an economic development goal of moving into higher value added economic activities, warehousing and distribution is a part of the economy, but it is not the entirety of the story, and it's not the story of moving into advanced manufacturing. And therefore, the zoning doesn't make very clear sense of this. And this became an analytic challenge in going through the work. You see a lot of this industrial activity. Something is called a warehouse or it's zoned for warehouse, but actually it's hard to know what are they doing inside of it. And sometimes you actually have to go visit to see what's going on there. So the zoning can be a useful tool in understanding that. It doesn't mean you don't promote or allow warehousing and distribution. It means you're trying to distinguish in order to prioritize, which could then lead to a kind of next one of preserving some prime sites for these higher value added industrial activities. That is something that is done in many places for many reasons. Major cities do this for sort of high value economic activities in certain areas. That's something the region could do, could really think of where these kind of core infrastructure opportunities adjacent to rail. I'm thinking Beard Industrial Park, which is, private land, but places where you have strong competitive advantages already, you might want to maintain those if you're trying to move in this direction of other industrial activity. And then similarly, because there's sufficient amount of land for the growth under existing zoning, it might mean that there's a lot less potential rezoning of prime ag land that you need to do to support economic growth. And that becomes a tension in many parts of California. That's land that's might be lower cost, but it's serving a function. And we understand with Sigma and changes with the water dynamics, but that might be land that you could preserve for future economic growth and focus the industrial activities in other areas. So this is part of the strategic question of kind of where do we focus and think about putting the activity. And then lastly, of these kind of, ideas, opportunities for discussion that I'm starting with is really thinking about the co-location of industrial activities with some warehousing and distribution functions. There's a lot of growing interest in this. There's some great investment opportunities happening in other states and in and around Dallas and outside of Austin. We're seeing more of this, of using the kind of strategic locational advantages of certain places to then have those become both distribution and manufacturing. And then in addition, we're thinking those could be sites for on-site clean energy generation in something, and that's sort of, using the circular economy model. And if you think about growing firms in other parts of California and within the region that are looking to source manufacturing, and we want to capture that in California as opposed to in other states, you have this advantage of location, you have this advantage of existing industrial land, you have this competitive advantage already in the kind of distribution, but it's adding on the manufacturing alongside with the on-site clean energy generation that really becomes the differentiating factor. So those are some kind of strategic recommendations that come out of this work that I really want to make sure we discuss. But I wanted to start with that because I think it's important to kind of lay that out there. So and Thomas, I'll sort of do, spend less time on the kind of details, but I want to begin with that because I actually really think we should have this as a discussion. So the analytic work that was done was trying to understand the characteristics, the industrial land, the buildings, and look at the demand. So a supply-demand analysis of kind of what's there. The land is, on a zoning side, the buildings that are sitting on top of the industrial land, and then the demand, which is based on the kind of employment forecasts. And then you convert the employment forecasts by industry into demand for space and for industrial land. And so that was sort of the core piece of the work that happened. Just on a kind of high level with the industrial demand, or sorry, with the industry or economic demand overall, it is slowing and declining from what it's been, but it is steady growth. And you look across the kind of industries that are there, it's broad-based. But I think what's interesting here is that retail trade is one where there's quite a bit of significant decline, and some of that has showed up in the kind of distribution facilities for the retail industry. So it's one of the pieces that's shifting, but in terms of the impact on automation in those environments, that's also an area that we are concerned about from an overall job perspective. But the steady economic growth and the steady employment growth is the core piece of it, but the slowing nature of it is the one that really changes the dynamic in terms of industrial demand. So stepping back, where is the existing industrial space in the region? Vast majority of it is in San Joaquin County, the largest piece, but Stanislaus is about a little bit less than half of the total amount that's in San Joaquin County, and Merced is quite a bit less. And I guess we're going to 5% of the industrial space. And I think we might hear a little bit more detail on Merced in a bit. So we kind of think about it writ large, about 270 million some odd square feet of industrial space. But if you look here, the kind of warehouses and distribution, they're separate from each other. That's really where the vast majority of it is. This kind of industrial, light and heavy industrial is a much smaller share. Now, it doesn't mean there's not any manufacturing going on in the warehouses and distribution, but by definition, that is what most of the facilities are zoned as. And this is where you can see it kind of added up, and that's where we get to the 76% in those first two categories there. So that's sort of an important piece. I should give one caveat. The data source that we're using is CoStar, which tends to be the space that is on the market for leasing. There are examples of companies that do have food processing facilities that they wouldn't lease out that may not appear on CoStar. And there's just not simply a way to aggregate that. For example, a Gallo might not have all the land that it uses in the database. Some of it is, some of it isn't. So the food processing total square footage could be a little bit off, but this is the amount that's in the kind of market that's out there for leasing activity. So a couple of maps to kind of get us a sense of things. And we've, given the shape of the county, we have these sorted by county. It's hard to show on a kind of on the three county level at once. But here's San Joaquin County, and you can see the share of warehousing and distribution buildings that are located across the county here. It's not a surprise that some of the smaller spaces you can see in and around the center of Stockton are the smaller facilities. The larger facilities are more where you get to the edges of communities, and of course the 580 I-5 corridor, the east side of Tracy, and the further to the west is where you have a lot of the newer facilities. But those bigger purple dots are the distribution centers. Warehouses are certainly have been around for many decades, and that's why you see those. And we'll get to Stanislaus County and Modesto in just a moment. But I assume this sort of resonates with people of kind of where the spaces are. But there's concentrations of activity in and around certain communities. The Stockton point that I mentioned at the very beginning around zoning specifically for distribution is one way to understand what's happening in the environment. And so that's something of a potential suggestion for what could be done for other communities. Bear with me for a sec. There we go. Okay, yeah, wasn't going forward. When we come down to Stanislaus County, what you can see here is really much more concentration along the 99 corridor, and then that area to the east of downtown Modesto, the Beard Industrial Park, in and around where the Gallo facilities are, which has rail lines on both sides of it. A lot of facilities there. These are smaller scale, right? These are slightly smaller dots. You can see the green, the larger food processing that emerges here as well. And then, of course, in and around Patterson, the larger distribution centers. So this is kind of where a lot of the activity is, but the 99 corridor continues to be. And the west side of Turlock is an area that's worth talking about and considering. You can see there's quite a bit of activity there, but it is, in a sense, further from some existing communities, whereas some of these other older warehousing facilities are right in and around existing communities. And to the extent that industrial activities can be co-located with existing neighborhoods, great. To the extent that that becomes a conflict, that's something to consider. So again, I know some of you here are representing individual cities and or counties. And when you sort of zoom out, I think some of those questions of how do you avoid conflict, but also make jobs in places that are accessible become key opportunities. And then heading down to Merced County, as you see here, much less overall activity and opportunities, but still also on the 99 corridor, and then of course some in and around Castle, former Castle Air Base and airport in there. So that's kind of where the buildings are, a little bit on the kind of demand and kind of rents and vacancy. And I think what's important here across all the regions is that vacancy rates have been reasonably low, generally below 10%, and rents have been going up. In other words, there is demand to be in industrial space in the region. We said in the beginning, most of it is warehousing and distribution, but this is a good news sign. This is not data you would see for all parts of the country. So let me just sort of show these quickly at a high level. But San Joaquin County rents are sort of doubling over a 10-year period, and the vacancy rates are fluctuating, but they're staying under 10%. In Stanislaus County, again, vacancy rates are fluctuating, but they're lower. They're quite a bit lower, and rents are sort of more than doubling over this 10-year period. And then Merced County rent growth is still solid and robust at 50%. It's not quite as much, and some fluctuation up and down, but again, well below 10% for most counties for most years going back a decade. That is a positive place to be in for a lot of the regions. Then when we look at where have the buildings been built, sort of, 2/3 of this went into San Joaquin County and about a quarter into Stanislaus County. And you can see that the sort of the vast majority in San Joaquin, that's much more aligned with the supply. As you saw with the kind of vacancy and demand side, there was slight higher vacancies in San Joaquin County. Some of that's just a math equation related to the fact that there was so many more deliveries. But the deliveries didn't radically outpace the overall demand. What we see here, and this is what I wanted to kind of show you. If we zoom into the individual counties, there was demand exceeded supply, deliveries of new buildings for a number of years. Then, starting around 2019 and then into the pandemic, the demand for industrial space continued, but there was a lot of kind of deliveries that continued for a number of years. And that's why you see these orange bars higher than the green bars or blue bars, depending on how your screen looks, for a couple years. So that's more deliveries than absorption in recent years. So that's San Joaquin County. Stanislaus County, you can see, is a little bit up and down, continuing to be obviously deliveries over time, but quite a bit of net absorption over the years. And then Merced County, not as much in overall deliveries, much less. And then sort of net absorption was kind of changed and adjusted. So what I hope this is giving you a picture of is a region that has a significant amount of space that continues to be added, very different county by county, but overall, generally kind of robust demand that exists across this. I want to get us to the home stretch here, Thomas, because I know we want to get to some other folks. So just a few more maps to show here, and we can come back. Here's a few sort of industrial buildings that you can see sort of proposed on the edges of some of the areas, particularly significant amount in Patterson and kind of south east of Stockton. And then I wanted to kind of maybe just end with this question of sort of zoning, because this is where, from planning terms, this is how we can't control the demand, but we can control the kind of space. And we believe it would be, and a lot of you on the phone here would actually worthwhile sitting down with some of these maps and really kind of opening up and looking at them and really investigating this question of, do we have enough supply, and is it in the right place? Because I sort of maintain that becomes the fundamental question. At this high level, we said there seems to be enough land, but I think those of you that are working on the ground in each of these communities can much more answer the question of what's happening, what interest is there on these particular sites, and what you think it might take to turn those into development opportunities here. So some of the vacant land, as you can see here, is again, is in those sort of edge communities. It's hard to see when you zoom in. There's certainly some vacant land in the center of Stockton, but actually less so than there are in some of these larger parcels. The larger parcels, though, are quite interesting when we think about these advanced manufacturing opportunities and the co-location idea that I suggested before. So that's San Joaquin County in a couple of these pieces here. And I am recognizing, given time, we're going to do the industrial zoning for Merced, and then we'll close this, Thomas, and switch it over to Alison. So what we can see here, where the zoning exists in these communities, I think it's important that you see that, again, in Turlock on the west side of the community, the significant areas, this big chunk in the, towards the center of Modesto, but a lot of that is reasonably built out. So when we look at the industrially zoned land, again, here's zoning and here is vacant. These areas that are vacant are more to the edge. I will note in that kind of west side of Turlock, that's an example of where you start to get into prime ag land. So a strategic question becomes, to what extent does the region want to keep focusing or have any focus or limitation on industrial activity in what are areas that are or are adjacent to prime ag land? And so lastly, this is the Merced piece as well. You see it sort of bleeds into, the way the county looks. Some of those pieces here where the zoning looks, and then the vacancy. So again, there's zoning, and then there's vacancy. So there's still a significant amount of vacancy in Merced. And so what I will do is stop sharing here and sort of end with a kind of concluding point, which is that San Joaquin County has had a lot of the demand over recent years. There is less overall supply of land in Stanislaus and Merced counties, but I think we're seeing some of the activity and opportunities shifting more to the south. And I think for a region where there's been some conflict between warehousing activities and community needs, that might be a positive opportunity for the region. But in general, across the entire region, the opportunity to move up the value chain through the co-location with manufacturing is a core need.
Thanks, Egon. And again, I think you've set up really well the context that Alison's team has established in terms of, how do we interrogate this data? Well, that's what we're going to turn to in a moment, but you've got a lot of really interesting issues that you just raised. And so I'd like to give a minute or five to any questions that people have about the analysis, and I have some too, but let's let those questions come up right now. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll let Egon reply to you.
Well, I see the question in the chat. Does vacant land refer to land in land zone industrial that hasn't been built upon, like it's a green field, or land where buildings are currently vacant? And it's both. And it's so there could be a building on it, but the building is largely empty, and that would be deemed vacant. So it's not just green, it's not just undeveloped land, but it would be count as land that's opportunity. And I actually, one thing I should note here, there are different consulting firms that have different methodologies around what they would deem an opportunity, whether or not there's a building on X% of the site. And so this one is actually using a slightly, there's more opportunity generated by this than one might look in other contexts. But yeah, Elazar.
Hi there. I'll be quick. Thank you so much for all your time and work, everybody in the whole team. The one thing that I'm maybe feeling is missing in this analysis, and I'm not sure if this is going to come later, is some questions about carbon impact and environmental impact, especially as we look at these maps and we talk about, is this the right place? It's hard for me to try to understand that with the best interest of the region in mind without really understanding where are the environmental impacts concentrated, and what ways can we think about like building structurally recommendations or strategies to try to mitigate environmental impacts. Thank you.
So if I can interrupt you for a second there, Egon, I know in the baseline assessment, we struggled with that very question because in terms of the data on what is the environmental externalities of a particular business, it gets very specific And most of the information that we have is based on national studies, and those have very different regulatory requirements than what we have in California. So when you generalize them to California, you also can mislead in terms of what we're assuming about the impacts of some of these industries. Not to say that your point isn't well placed, but that's almost, you know, a couple of steps down the road in terms of what the specifics of the industries are. But that's just the framing that I have, and I don't know, Egon, if you had any other comments in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think part of what it is, and one of the things I didn't show was we do actually have a little bit of overlay of like prime land with vacant sites, and I think what you're suggesting are different overlays. So one, to jump ahead, Thomas and team, to other things, I think something that would be really robust for the region is having some of these data layers where you could layer them on top of each other and say, well, let's think about this area. If there was these sets of activities in this area, what are the adjacencies to existing communities of concern, existing highway networks, and you could just use that as a way to evaluate. So I think the point's well taken. Looks like there's other.
Eric?
Thank you.
Yeah, mine is just kind of a clarification, Egon. You showed a slide where you talked about some of the numbers might be off, particularly in food processing, because some of that is not available for lease. And I just wanted to clarify for folks, if you could affirm that the reason we have that orientation is because this is really about attracting new business into the region. And so we're focused on where that new opportunity might be, less so about like what exists and what is occupying space now.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful question. Right. So this is almost everything. It's just because we're talking about an economic strategy and growing a set of industries, you're going to have companies come in onto land that's available in the marketplace. And so that is the source of information that we're putting forth there. So yes, it's not externally looking at all, but it's also internally looking of companies that are looking for locations kind of within the county. Yeah, thank you, Eric. That's an important caveat.
And I just wanted to point out there's a question in the chat around, does vacant refer to land zones for industrial that hasn't yet been built upon? And is that including land where industrial buildings are currently vacant?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think I tried to answer. I can probably when Alison, I can write a more detailed answer to that. But the point is, it's both of them. It's not just greenfield undeveloped land.
Thanks. I've a lot more questions, but I'm going to save them till the end. And thank you, Egon. And now I'd like to hand it over to Alison to give us an overview of the geospatial clearinghouse and portal that her team at Stan State have developed.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Pogue, so much, and team and everybody for being here to learn about the product that we put together as part of this North Valley Thrive project. I'm really excited to share with everybody. Hopefully you can all see my screen here. I'm going to try to briefly go through a little bit of the development of what we did here. So my name is Alison McNally. I'm an associate professor of geography and environmental resources at CSU Stanislaus in Turlock. I'm also the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Applied Spatial Analysis. So the opportunity to participate in this and develop something that was really based in kind of geospatial technologies that provides people accessibility to data was really exciting for us. So I was really excited to be part of this project. I worked with a couple of really great folks as part of this team. When we were first approached to put together a geospatial portal, there were a few different characteristics that the portal had to meet. One of the goals was to be able to provide information about property information within the region, to be able to track land use in the region, to use the data in this portal in a way that could be interacted with, viewed, downloaded, and really used in scenario planning. So allowing people the opportunity to be able to, as was discussed earlier with Egon's work and some of the questions, be able to overlay some of these data sets together to see different relationships and how things influence one another. And then finally, of course, to conduct spatial analysis with this. So as a geographer, one of the things I'm always thinking about are relationships across the landscape and between various different variables. So I'll kind of share what we did there. Some of the key elements here that we were asked to put together was the opportunity or ability for folks to be able to search and filter through the data sets. So whatever data we're hosting up in this portal, to be able to have a way for folks to find exactly what they're looking for, and to provide a more of a map-based interface. And so I heard some really great questions asking about some maps and ways for people to view data. And I agree, it's a very powerful tool to be able to do that, and to be able to have some autonomy and control over what you're overlaying and what you're looking at really helps in streamlining those decision-making processes. It gets pretty exciting teaching students how to do this when they have that aha moment that they have power to like show things on a map. It's pretty great. And then also the providing an opportunity for enhancing the partnerships in the North San Joaquin Valley region. See if I can move forward here in my slide. So I wanted to reach out and really start to bring people on to my team that had some of this expertise, that were already doing some of this really great work. And one of the first people I reached out to was Gene Barrera, who is the GIS manager for the County of Merced. And he also teaches for us at Stan State. And I've known Gene for several years, and he does fantastic work. He has been working on some of these regionalization efforts toward kind of incorporating GIS data across a more region. And so he was a really great person to bring on board. And so he put a lot of effort toward helping to develop this as a tool. He's been engaged with the California Road Sharing Initiative, if any of you are familiar with that, the CARS initiative, and then also the Next Generation 911. And so those are more regional and statewide efforts towards regionalizing GIS data. And for those of you that know GIS and data, it's not an easy task to be able to make or have data match up across counties. And so that's a real effort that we were tasked to work on. And then I also reached out to Geographic Technologies Group, thinking that to regionalize this effort and to put something together that's going to be sustainable and it's going to meet several stakeholder needs, we really wanted to take some time to put together a strategic plan. And so Geographic Technologies Group is an organization that's worked on several strategic plans at various scales, so local, regional, and even across state boundaries. And so they helped us put together a white paper that looked at the existing conditions analysis of our region. So who uses GIS? How do they engage in that process? How do they use GIS? They reviewed the existing GIS frameworks. They also started to develop this conceptual system design. So as we're going to regionalize this, what is it going to look like for our region? And then they're also helping us develop an implementation strategy. So given that at some point we'd like to roll this out to be an actual tool that people can use across our region, what will that look like? What do data sharing components and agreements need to look like? What do confidentiality agreements need to look like? How do people interact with and being able to share information across this platform? So one of the first things that we did was we leveraged the information and the data that we already have access to start building this platform, and we decided to use Esri as our platform. Esri is a creator and maker of all things geospatial. They have robust tools that are widely used throughout local, regional jurisdictions, state levels, federal levels, and even internationally. So it's a platform that several people, if you're engaged in GIS, already have some familiarity with. It's a great tool for being able to load up your data sets. They provide platforms for being able to allow people to kind of play around with that. They can interact with the data. They can turn layers on and off, and I'll give you a preview of that in just a couple of minutes. And it also allows for people to start performing some basic analyses. So there were some great questions earlier about how do we tell, if you're going to cite one of these industrial lands, what impact might that have on the local neighborhood? Who lives around there? How many schools might be around there? Where are the parks and that sort of thing? So these sorts of tools allow us to ask those sorts of questions. We wanted to survey the users within the North San Joaquin Valley region and really understand how people engage with GIS and geospatial data. And we have, as you might imagine, it runs the gamut for people who are just kind of understanding how to read a map and how to turn some layers on and off, to people that really download and do some robust modeling with the information. And so in our minds, the users have to be able to kind of run that span of applications and capabilities. So we talked with irrigation districts, local jurisdictions, community organizations, And really what we were hearing from people that we spoke with was there was widespread support of this. And as you might imagine, and maybe in some of your own work, being challenged with access to tools or software or the affordability, it's not a really cheap software to be able to purchase for your organization. And so some of the benefits here that people illustrated were that accessibility to data, the ability to share data, to collaborate across networks and between agencies. And then some of the challenges that they identified that they were very excited about this possibility for a tool was to engage in training and learn how to use these tools to answer some questions. Maybe be able to buy into the ability to access data at a very cheap or affordable level. And then one of the challenges that people also have is a lack of personnel. Again, this is something that kind of prohibits a lot of organizations from being able to engage in this decision-making process. So Geographic Technologies Group came up, we looked at different models of what might work for our region, and it kind of runs the gamut from just being the independent model where it's one organization kind of sharing out that information without there being much give and take and sharing amongst the different agencies and organizations, all the way up to a regional consortium-based model where you pay to be part of that model. Well, we didn't want to do that. We don't want to charge people for being able to access this information. And so one of the models that we are building this idea around is the multi-agency model. And that would mean that there is a central hub that could act as that curator of data and that maintainer of data and kind of organizing those agreements, but that people could be able to communicate with one another. So different agencies and organizations would be able to share data, use data, and kind of leverage their strengths. So if you have, if you work in the city of Merced and you have access to specific data that's very specific to Merced, that you might be able to share that out with the larger region. So I wanted to open the link here and kind of show you what this tool looks like, and I'll post in the chat here if I can find my chat.
I think I posted it already.
Okay,
I
great.
hope everybody's got that.
Yes,
I posted
perfect.
it in while you were talking. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to bring this up. It's very robust, so that, whoops, there's a lot to it. Okay, so this is what our first attempt at putting this really robust tool together looks like. So this is our proof of concept here. And so what you'll come upon if you've already clicked on the link is a landing page. And the landing page kind of discusses some of what North Valley Thrive is, what this geospatial portal is. So a bunch of information here about our region. And then across the top here are various tabs that you can click. So there's one that talks about what is geospatial technology. There's a tab here that focuses on our region. And then for the counties here, you'll see that each county has a separate tab. And so I'm going to click on Merced County here. And my computer is really chugging to keep up with this. So what we thought might be useful, especially for folks engaging in different sorts of analyses, is to create these curated maps that combine various data sets together. So we have one that looks at land use, we have one that looks at agriculture, environment, and so on. If we fast forward, we just recently incorporated the industrial lands analysis that Egon was sharing with us earlier. So if I click on this industrial lands analysis here, it will bring up an interactive mapping application that you actually have some control over. So notice that it opens up and there's all kinds of different layers that you're looking at. And this is the data that we received from Egon's team in doing this industrial lands analysis. So we just put it all right into the interface. But what you'll see, the interfaces for these maps are very similarly in that there's a legend where you can actually turn layers on and off. So obviously all of the layers here with the blue check mark are visible within the map viewing screen here. So if we go ahead and turn some of those layers off, again, it's taken a second for my computer to keep up, they'll eventually remove themselves from the interface. It can be interacted with. So this data, if you click on one of the layers here, and apologies for my, again, slow computer, what this is doing, what this pop-up shows you is at that particular location where I clicked, it's showing me all of the different layers that I have turned on or visible in this interface. And so here there are 10 layers at this particular location where I clicked. And so if let me dock my little page here, but if I click my little legend, it's going to show me each of those layers that this is overlaying. And so we can turn these layers on and off. So if we don't want to see the water district that it's in, we can close that. But if we wanted to read a little bit about this farmland, we can click this particular feature here and it'll tell us information about that particular feature that we clicked on. So in terms of being robust and allowing it to you to view multiple data sets at one time, this is a really robust tool for being able to do that. One of the other examples I wanted to show you is we also put together some other curated sort of maps. If we scroll down a little bit, we put one together with land use and demographics. So we have information in here about people and the different types of land uses. And so when the question came through about what the environmental toll might be on some of these decisions that we're making in terms of planning, these sorts of maps allow us to ask those kinds of questions. And so here we've populated it with some of the data we had access to. So here's assessor's land use data, and this little eyeball means that the layer is visible. It's a very robust data layer, so it takes a little bit to load. But if we zoom in, let's see, I might want to look at the land use in terms of the assessor's parcel and maybe some of the zoning designations. So I'm going to turn that on as well. And if I zoom in a little bit to kind of speed the map up, and I choose my location icon here and click on the map, when my computer catches up, it will show us an analysis within 1 mile buffer of this particular location. It'll show us out of the layers that are turned on, how many of whatever it is. So within this 1 mile buffer here, it's showing us here the zoning designations within that one mile zone. So if we wanted to ask questions about where those industrial lands are, how close are they to schools, how close are they to maybe impacted environmental areas, these tools allow us to do that. We can click the assessor's land use and we can get even more information about that. How many churches are there? How many commercial condos are there, et cetera, et cetera. So again, very powerful way to host multiple layers of data within one interactive interface. And then we'll close that. And one more thing I wanted to show you about the hub here, about the portal, is this data hub. So granted, several of us work in GIS and we like to have our own control over some of these data layers. So the idea with the data hub is that we could host some of those layers for people to be able to download and do their own analysis with. So if that tool is within your capacity and you have access to GIS software, you will be able to download data sets based on whatever different category here. So let me shrink that up in the interest of time. I'm going to move on to the next couple of slides here. So I put some screenshots here just in case the portal was not cooperating with me. But this is essentially looking at the various maps that we have curated, ready to go for people to look at. And I might also mention that we've started to populate Stanislaus County and San Joaquin County with data also. But since we wanted to really provide a robust proof of concept tool, we use Merced County as kind of the county to focus on for developing this portal interface. And then again, the hub here where people are able to access data based on various sorts of themes here. So some next steps for us is that we are looking toward implementing that GIS strategic plan. So engaging in a more robust review of existing GIS frameworks. We had a few months to kind of query people in the region to see what their capacity is, and that's not quite enough time to be able to do that. So since then, we've been looking at what it's going to take to actually be able to get a deep level view of how people do utilize that GIS technology or how they might use the GIS technology and what some of those challenges are. We really wanted to drill down on our conceptual system design, so kind of iron out what that multi-agency model might look like, start talking about what data sharing agreements, confidentiality agreements, and that sort of thing might look like. And then think about our implementation strategy. So how do we really build this network? Who do we include in this, and how do we reach out to various partners? Move toward this real true regionalization of geospatial data. So again, those sharing agreements, the standardizing the data, which I mentioned is no small feat. So making parcel lines match up between Merced and Stanislaus County is a challenge because people have different jurisdictions have different ways of describing those data sets. And so making those all marry up and pair nicely is quite a bit of work. How do we maintain accessibility? So recognizing that it's going to take quite a bit to build this into a robust tool, how do we ensure that this is going to stay sustainable and maintained for future years? And then really developing that interface. So we've gotten some feedback from some of the users. How do we incorporate that user interface with functionality of the actual portal itself? And toward that end, we have a couple of examples here that I wanted to share, really quickly share with you. Geographic Technologies Group, we got a little bit of additional funding toward the end of our working on this portal. And so with Geographic Technologies Group in concert, we developed some more robust ways that people can interact with the data. So this is looking at another interface that might be of use where people can actually put all of the regions together and be able to look at the data as a complete and solid region instead of individually by county by county. So this is kind of a zoning interface that has all of the zoning designations. And if you scroll down here, it has various dashboards. So if we really wanted to look at Merced County, we could click on that dashboard and really start to dive in deep to the zoning data that is hosted within the geospatial portal. And as this pops up, the dashboard is an example of a way that really allows the user some very robust tools for really drilling down and looking at the different patterns or types of in this case, zoning that exists within the county. So we've got various pie charts and bar charts that allow us to display some of the data. There's also another interface that, again, is a way to kind of ask questions in terms of location and what might be close to what. And this is a way to do that. This is looking at, so if you wanted to look at a particular address, I'm going to look at Castle Air Base and see what might be near Castle Air Base. So we can actually, if we have different layers loaded up in here, this is looking at parks. It looks like that within a 1 mile buffer of the park, of Castle, there aren't any parks that are state parks that exist. So that's another example of ways people can interact with that data. And the last one here is really pretty robust. This is called the Tapestry tool. And this is one way that we've been experimenting with trying to serve up demographic data in a way that is really interactive, that provides people lots of flexibility with how they visualize that data. And so this is pulling from the Census Bureau data, which we are piping in through Esri. And you can see by these little honeycombs here that there are all kinds of different variables and data sets that people can look at. This is looking at San Joaquin County specifically. We can scroll through and look at other counties as well here, but if we wanted to look at maybe the high school rates, we can pop up that little honeycomb and it'll give us more additional data of those particular high school rates. So lots of robust ways of looking at and interacting with that data. And I know we're getting near our end, so I will close with that. We're also developing some other training materials and workshops to be able to share this portal out with folks and show them how to use it. So with that, I will close my sharing screen and thank you for the opportunity to share this work with us, with you guys.
Thanks so much, Alison. That's really exciting. Let's throw it open for some questions from the audience here. I see lots in the chat, but does anybody want to ask directly or we can go through those?
And I'll make a note for folks. We had said we would be on for an hour. I don't think we don't mind staying on a little longer, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So before we go to questions, just want to thank everybody and thank our speakers today. This is like such a great demonstration of the value that North Valley Thrive is trying to bring to the region. So if you've got to jump off, we certainly understand, but we're going to stay on to field a couple questions. And I see some in the chat.
Great. So should I just go through the chat and see Celine had asked a question about the industrial lands analysis maps for Stanislaus or San Joaquin. Yes, this is sort of fresh off the press. So you're getting exposed to Merced within the last few days. So we'll be incorporating those maps as well. And I can certainly update the team of when those are implemented so that folks can actually access that information.
And Alison, related to that, would you be able to share? I know we're going to be posting your notes, but those links, if you could drop those in the chats for those other websites as well, I think there'd be a lot of interest in exploring those too if they're available.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, those are our prototypes. So we are trying to think about how we would grow this. So I'm happy to share those links, but just know that they are sort of in draft form. So, but I welcome feedback. Absolutely. So if people, yes, I will certainly share those.
Trevin, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. I know this is really preliminary. I'm a huge fan of GIS, and I should have picked that as my career, but maybe another life. So just really understanding that this is preliminary, in terms of a proposal, would any of you be able to kind of speak to what the partnerships kind of more look like, specifically like how is it currently being funded, and what are the ideas for keeping it funded? And then again, could you mention again who the lead agency is? And then a couple other questions that I had was, where is it going to live? Is it going to live with the lead agency? And then is that data subject to PRAs? And then also like, how is it being envisioned that the data would be shared between agencies? I heard a cooperative agreement or something like that, an MOU. But if you could speak more to the logistics of just that specific component too. Really just the objective that I'm trying to think of is, what is the role for my agency, and what would be expected if we wanted to help this be successful?
I'm going to hand it over to Allison, but also just in terms of contact, you're welcome to contact any of the North Valley Thrive admin team, either myself, Eric, or Yolanda, and we'll make sure you get in touch with the right people. But Allison's also, I know, available, but she's got a day job with the university, so we'll make sure that those messages get to her as well. But you're also definitely welcome to contact her. But Allison, I think that's sort of what you guys are looking for the next phase, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you very much for the great question. I'll say it's never too late to pursue your career in GIS, so come on over and study with us. But I appreciate your thoughts on that. So funding, we did get some funding from the North Valley Thrive project to develop the portal. We're currently looking at funding streams that are going to help us develop it out. The way that we envision, so Geographic Technologies Group is helping us conceptualize the way that everybody's going to be able to communicate together. So the agreements that we're talking about and ways that we would share data, we are anticipating that the Center for Applied Spatial Analysis, or what we envision, our Center for Applied Spatial Analysis, could serve as that hub to coordinating the data sets and coordinating these agreements. We are trying to conceptualize what that might look like as an academic institution serving as that role. And so Geographic Technologies Group is helping us trying to visualize what that might look like. And they've got extensive experience in doing that. The new part, I think, is that we're an academic institution. And so we're looking at ways that will work. We generally like to include students on research, all of our projects. So kind of looking at what that might look like with students kind of integrated in that process as well. So we would anticipate that the role that different agencies would serve is basically a commitment to be able to attend trainings, attend workshops, engage in this network that we're going to be trying to build, and encouraging folks to be able to share information as they have the capacity to do so. And we are trying to foresee what our sustainability plan is for this. What would funding look like in the short term and the long term to ensure that this stays relevant, maintained, and continues to serve our region for the future?
I'll take a stab at that too. So Trevin, so this is a product of North Valley Thrive. We were happy to, give it some pilot funds. A couple things is on Friday, we're going to announce the opening of our $9 million, Catalyst Fund. And so this project would be eligible to apply for funds to continue to develop it. Whether or not that pans out, we have a commitment to it over sort of the life of our structural funding, which is through September 2026, to continue to nurture it. But I think like you're tapping into its broader sustainability plan and its value proposition to the county. So we're trying to stand it up one way or another to get its legs firm enough so that then sort of the municipalities see its value and then can perpetuate it on. But I think like, Allison and Dr. Pogue have talked about, it's in its initial kind of phase. And I think like the contribution of partners like you will make it an even better product. And I think it'll just like increase that value proposition. So that's what we're hoping will happen over the next year.
And I might just use that as a segue to mention that, we found out after it happened that another industrial lands analysis had been done in San Joaquin County, separate from the regional one. And part of what the clearinghouse idea is doing, and bringing it back to Egon, and a question I have for him is how do we make sure that we're not recreating something individually and spending resources that should be leveraged and brought up together. And in that context, I just wanted to mention and ask you, Egon, I know in some of the conversations it was about how can this position the region to better market it for the mega region and those industrial lands availabilities, but also some of the constraints in terms of rural areas. And I wonder if you just maybe have a few thoughts on that you might share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions in there, but I think that this is the core thing. A part of the whole North Valley Thrive process is elevating the stature of the region as a region. Obviously, each community, there's land, there's parcels, there's needs and opportunities, but sort of saying this is a place for a set of economic opportunities, and doing that at the regional scale is important. I do think conversations like this, having a very clear clearinghouse of information is important so that you're not duplicating the work, that you kind of do it once. And one of the recommendations that's in this larger regional industrial lands analysis is to update it, is to continue it and maintain it. And that's a perfect role and opportunity for a university or this consortium of universities to have and do. And then the efforts, the sort of economic development strategic questions become ones of like, well, what do we do with the information? Are there sites that we want to dive into further to really both make sure they have the right infrastructure and B, to market them? And Elazar, to your question, make sure that those are places where if we are encouraging a set of industries to grow there, it's not coming into conflict with other goals, with other community needs. And I think that's the core question. And I think that's what differentiates Thrive and the whole Jobs First process from other ways of doing economic development that exist all over the state. So I think, Thomas, a long way of saying that I think that isn't precisely what this is about. And I think that having a place for the information to live that everybody knows about and can get access to, and then some of the marketing part of it is summarizing that. So kind of summarizing some of these core sites. I mentioned this in the very beginning that Beam Circular had been involved in some of the bioeconomy aspects of this, but a part of that question for across all these sectors are what are the places that really become areas of opportunity that you really might want to focus infrastructure investment and focus kind of marketing opportunities. Gene.
Yes. As I was looking at the tool, someone was playing around with it. I can see that the information is pretty live, right? Will there be an automated or will there be a hand behind the system that's going to be able to capture pictures of the data so that as information is morphing, land is being allocated, reallocated, because governments and just our social structure is this life-breathing animal to an extent. Will we be able to capture so that potentially 10 years, 20 years from today, we can look back and say, this is how it used to look and this is what it is now, so that we can make better decisions in the future? Is that going to be one tool that's available, or how will that work?
Yes, thank you for the question, Gene. That's absolutely one of the things that we've been talking about. And in our conversations with potential users, one of the questions was, how do we ensure that we still maintain access to data 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road? That's going to be something that we will have to maintain in terms of our clearinghouse and not getting rid of the data. And I don't know what your experiences might be with access to information with different, ways that we are with different federal initiatives that are coming down the pike. But when we lose access to data, that's a real disruption to our workflow. And so we are looking at what it will take to actually host on our servers the data itself so that we're not relying on feeding it from, the federal data clearinghouses of any sort, because we frankly want to make sure that we have access to information so that we can make decisions and we don't lose that, that we don't have that disruption. So that's something that we're looking at. It kind of plays into the earlier question too about serving that locally with us and not, but we will have the capability of piping in, streaming in, and updating data sets as they become updated themselves. So that's robust, but something that I think will be important to maintain so that we have access again to the information that we're going to need.
And
I'm
maybe,
going to hand it over to, oh, go ahead, Egon.
well, I was going to say maybe it's both a question for Alison, but also sort of a response that one of the data sets the state provides is a farmland kind of mapping layer. I'm not sure exactly what the name of it is, but it shows the change in farmland over time. And right now, as we look forward the next 20 years, there's going to be some shifts in the amount of farmland that's used because of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's the kind of shift or change where it'd be important to know, what does it look like now? Where is the farmland that's active now? And then how does it change over time? And in this industrial lands conversation, it's a very potent question of, if land gets taken out of the agricultural land, well, what does the region or the city or the communities want that land to go into, right? That could be a land that could become clean energy if that's a desirable set of activities, but tracking what it was to what it is today to what it changes over time is really an important consideration. And there's some data sets where you can backtrack and look at what the changes have been over 20 years. And I think the farmland mapping is one of them. But there isn't an industrial land tracking that goes back historically, as far as I'm aware of. But I think I'm just naming, like, I think that's what's so critical about doing this now, so that you can prepare over time and see how the changes are playing themselves out. Oh yeah, that's the link. Thanks.
Eric.
Cool. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And as is typical for our webinars and stuff, I'd like to sort of prompt somebody else to give us a closing thought. So I'm wondering if Frank Quintero or Mayor Nelson can come on and just close us out with your final thoughts, your kind of reactions to this work, just asking you randomly to close us out with any kind of parting words and reflections. Mike and Frank, if either of you are still on.
Mayor? Well, Eric, this is Frank Quintero. Number one, outstanding work. This is exciting. And as a practitioner in economic development for 35 years, this has been a long time coming. So thank you for the efforts that were put in. Somehow I hope we can integrate site consultants to take a look at this, since they're the ones who really influence where industry goes. But in terms of what this will do for the region, this is game changing. And as I stated, extremely excited about it.
Very cool. All right. And with that, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you for our next session. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.